There's a great piece published by Defense Priorities by my organization that I work for, by Benjamin Friedman. It is called A New NATO Agenda, Less U.S., Less Dependency, and by extension, more security. Some of the key points in there, and by the way, we have the link to this in the description here if you want to go and read the whole thing. I highly recommend it. But three things I want to point out here is, number one, the United States should aggressively reduce its force presence in Europe. Now, that may seem counterintuitive because we have surged lots of forces in there, especially since 2022. But folks, that doesn't do anything to keep us safe. All it does is continue to reinforce on the Russian side that they have reason to keep moving their forces to the west and to keep trying to fight to gain more territory so that they can defeat Ukraine. And of course, their desire is to have a rump Ukraine in between NATO and Russia. They don't, despite what people ridiculously claim that Russia wants to go and invade NATO, they have no interest in doing that. They want the opposite. They want space between them and NATO. So they actually probably would never go beyond the Dnieper River, even if they go all the way up to that point, because then it undercuts their own security. And they're not being foolish with what they're doing. They actually have a rational plan. Even if you don't like, even if you hate Russia, it's still a rational plan to provide security for them. So if by withdrawing our forces and moving them back to the United States, or at least moving them in a less, what's the word I'm looking for, provocative posture, then we again reduce the reason why Russia would want to continue moving to the West. And listen, let me be clear on this. The United States does, in fact, have the most powerful military on the planet, especially in terms of force projection and the ability to project force around the world. We have incredible airlift, sea lift. We can move forces anywhere we need to. So by withdrawing them from the eastern part of Europe does not put us in any additional risk. We can always move anybody back if there's a need to it. That's why we're a superpower right now. But we should not exploit that and think that we are unlimited in power. And that's one of the things, one of the great failures of the Western world. Instead of recognizing we do have power and we should use it judiciously and wisely, we think it's unlimited power and that nobody can do anything against us, which is absurd and patently untrue. So that's one of the first things that we should do. That lessens tensions, and it does not put us at any additional risk, and it does save some money. Number two, Gary, if you could bring that back up. The next thing I wanted to talk about was, he said, Ben wrote, this would be consistent with NATO's original balancing purpose and the U.S. expectations then that garrisoning Europe was a temporary expedience, not a permanent tool of U.S. dominance. See, NATO was never supposed to be a permanent thing. Many of you may be aware of George Washington and his famous final speech as President of the United States, his farewell address, in which he expressly warned against don't have permanent enemies. Don't have permanent alliances. Let the conditions that exist foster that, because if you have permanent alliances, then you permanently attach yourself to the needs of others, which shift over time. And maybe it's not to your advantage in the future. That's exactly what it was with NATO. When we started, there was a good reason for it. Conditions have dramatically changed right now. And yeah, you see Gary put that up there on the screen. George wrote, why by interweaving our destiny with that of any other part of Europe, entangling our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalryship, interest, humor, or caprice. It is true policy to steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. That was great advice when he wrote it. I think that was 1798, and great advice today. And we're seeing the reasons why very graphically played out right now. Gary, bring that back up again. There we go. The result of the Russians' invasion of Ukraine underlined this happy point. Russia has proven weaker than conventional wisdom held. Now, again, NATO was formed against the Soviet Union and its massive armada of like 50,000 tanks, millions of troops, thousands of combat aircraft, and of course, thousands of missiles. None of that exists. None of that exists. So we don't need this massive bulwark on the other side of it anymore. So we don't need to continue to have all of that force in there. We just need to have the ability to backstop it. The defensive alliance, even if you want to continue it for some amount of period in the future, it needs to be commensurate with the risk, not some ethereal thing like bulwark against tyranny, which it can mean whatever anybody wants it to mean. It has to mean something tangible and specific like the balance of power. When you look at the balance of power that exists today, it is overwhelmingly on the Western side. So Russia has been unambiguous, and Putin himself has expressly admitted this. He is aware that his side is much weaker conventionally than the NATO/Western side. So he would never take the opportunity to attack into something where he would be certain to either lose or to have to resort to nuclear weapons. That would be suicidal. And you can say whatever you want about Putin. He is definitely not suicidal. And in fact, everything shows he wants to have the security of his country and on his borders secure. Let's take advantage of that. Let's exploit his desire to do that so that we don't push him unnecessarily to do something that is not in our favor and that is not to our benefit. That is the whole point here. That's what NATO should be doing right now. We should be a sober, cold-hearted look at what can we do to make sure our nations are safe and secure and that we don't get into any wars and that we actually seek peace. We actually prioritize diplomacy. We don't seek to push somebody else. We don't seek additional enemies to slay. No dragons to slay. We don't want to do anything that's going to cause us to have to use our military, much less spawn an attack by a fearful nation and in a fearful alliance, perhaps, if it goes into that direction. We've already seen, let's be honest with this, and I want to leave you with this as we close. How have we done since 2022? How have we done since 1997? How have we done since the end of the Cold War up to this point? Is our nation safer because of our actions? Is the Western alliance stronger today because of the things that we've done so far? Russia and China are now something close to a quasi-alliance, certainly diplomatically and increasingly in trade and other areas, which renders a lot of our sanctions against them pointless because now Russia has additional paths where they don't have to have Western help. And so these sanctions fall on deaf ears in many cases. Russia and North Korea. Now then, Russia's given North Korea probably help with their space force and their rocket force. In a response, they get lots of rockets themselves, artillery shells, other kinds of support, now possibly even troop support in the form of a limited number of North Korean soldiers and engineering units. North Korea, as well as, Iran is also, there's a famous or a big picture right now of Modi, who is visiting Russia, and they're in this big bear hug because they're getting closer and closer together. Like I said a minute ago, this BRICS is getting larger and larger against Western allies and against Western economic interests. All of these things are against us. All of these things are predictable responses to trying to run the world, to trying to tell everybody else what to do. Is that better for us? The answer is unequivocally no. I don't care. I can't say this more strongly. I don't care if people don't like to hear it, especially when we're trying to celebrate NATO. But this is maybe our last opportunity to do something that makes sense. Because if we solidify these mentalities that I've talked to you in this episode, we could find ourselves in a war we can't win. And even if we did, the cost would be astronomically high and would leave us weakened in ways that we can't even imagine today. Wars that we should never fight. We have no business fighting. We cannot benefit from. We benefit from peace, not fighting a war, winning or losing. We should avoid that at all costs. It is time to change mentality while we still can.